demand for US government debt is declining, right at the same time as the US government's appetite for borrowing is steadily increasing. And because nobody is jumping in to pick up the slack, interest rates are rising. And this is the reason why the US government is considering bank deregulation. Even though the rules that are set to be repealed were set in place in order to prevent a 2008 style crash, the crisis that the US government is staring down the barrel of would be worse. In other words, if the banks collapse, that's a big problem. If the US government runs out of lenders, it's game over. At least for them, not for anybody who's actually prepared. Regulators are expected to propose cutting the supplementary leverage ratio this summer. And this is something that earlier in the year, Jerome Powell suggested could help the treasury market. In other words, this would allow banks to buy either a lot more or potentially even an unlimited number of US treasuries. Given the fact that for a bank, a US Treasury is risk-free if you hold on to it maturity, and it's risk-free if you can sell it to the Fed for full price temporarily. There would be no risk reason to prevent banks from buying as many treasuries as they wanted. And because US banks are able to loan money into existence, they would have the incentive to do so because every treasury they buy would just be more income for them. In other words, all return and no risk. If these rule changes go into effect, we unleash major bond buying in the US Treasury market, which would push interest rates down across the entire yield curve. The government will be able to roll over a lot of their higher interest debt into lower interest debt, which would help out with the total cost of the national debt right